Good afternoon and welcome to Intellectual Freedom Conversations Part 2 on our continuing series of Tuesdays with CKLS. And I'm Margie Shepard, and to my right is Patty Collins. And we had a really tough time kind of narrowing this topic down for today. And we're just going to preface this with, if we get really, we're pretty excited and passionate about this. And every time I work with Patty on something like this, I learn something new. And one of the things I do want you to always remember, the library world is ever changing, ever evolving, and these intellectual freedom conversations and topics that we choose to highlight also do the same thing. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go to the present mode and we'll start talking about part 2 of our conversation. We had 3 topics, then we had 4 topics, then we're back to 3 topics, but these are not the 3 we started with because, as Margie said, we learn new things from working in your libraries, and so we're trying to respond to your questions to get you the best information we can, and also to teach us what we need to know to be able to help your libraries and the other libraries down the road. We the first thing that we're going to chat about today is the use of surveillance cameras in libraries, and that has been a new learning experience for some of our libraries in our areas. And then that's sort of connected to the use of photographs and how you deal with the consent of those. And then all of these are underneath patron privacy and confidentiality. And the other one we're going to talk about today is your patron circulation history. And then we're going to touch on something that we've touched on before, is the use of the Motion Picture Association rating systems and how it really works with public libraries, and how we label those materials or not label those materials. So hopefully you're going to pick up some tips today. We know you're going to have some questions, and please put those in the chat, and Mary Beth will be monitoring that and sharing that with us to make sure that we answer your questions. But please know that this is not a conversation that we have once and we're done with. We've already got us an all-day activity fun planned for you for the fall, because there's just not enough opportunity for us to share with you what you really need to know. Before we get started, I'm just going to remind you of something that I said yesterday at the Ideas Swap, was you are library professionals. You may call what you have a job, but you are a librarian and you are a professional. And because of that responsibility of being a professional, you are bound by the ethics of the profession. And everything that we're sharing with you are the ethical issues of being a librarian. You are doing the hard job of being a librarian. And today we're going to hit you with some stuff that's going to surprise you, and it's going to be in contrary to what you're currently doing in your library. Don't freak out about that. We're going to help you find the way to do it the right way. All right, so without further ado, we're going to launch right into this. So we thought it would be really appropriate to remind you what the difference between patron privacy and confidentiality is. So as this slide says, privacy is the right to open inquiry without having the subject of one's interest examined or scrutinized by others. So I think we can all agree on that. You know, patron comes into your library, they're going to use the internet, they're going to check out books, they're going to be perusing the shelves for all kinds of materials, and that's their right to do that. Some of the things, well, going on with that, confidentiality then exists when we as librarians in our libraries, and we'll include our ILS, you know, Pathfinder in this, you know, we possess a lot of patron identifiable information. And it's our mission then, and actually our responsibility to keep that information private on their behalf. So some examples of those personal identifiable information cues would be the name and the address, their phone number, their email address. There was a time a lot of our libraries used a driver's license number, and I hope they're not using that anymore. So I want you to think about this.
what happens to you when you're searching on the internet? Well, and it happened today. So, you go in and you do a search, and all of a sudden, everything that you've searched pops back up at you. Google knows that Patty was looking at movie ratings today, so it sent her information about what's playing in our local theater. And I don't know about you, but I kind of think that's a little creepy. I know it kind of bothers me when I get targeted advertising. So going a little bit further, think about the patrons in your library and what happens with them. So let's pretend you're a minor and you're seeking personal, social, and you're seeking your personal, social, your sexual identity. You should be free to walk in and be able to access those subjects for research and to be able to read them knowing that you're safe and you don't have to be afraid to be embarrassed, or you certainly don't want them to be put at risk for teasing or bullying. So these are the things that we always have to keep in the back of our mind when we're charged with protecting our patrons' privacy. All right, so we're going to get into security concerns. And one of the things that we've noticed while going to our libraries is this, the beginning of a lot of our libraries deciding that they need to use surveillance cameras. And some of you may have been using them for a long time. I know, schools with all the different the things that have been happening in schools across the country may have opted to put security cameras in their buildings. They may even decide to put them in the library. While the motives certainly might be pure, so for instance, we were in a library when we went on our bus tour. They have cameras because their line of sight is not clear. And I know this is really true of a lot of our libraries. I can think of right off the top of my head about 5 of them. You're at the circ desk, you can't see anywhere else in the library. So this is a logical answer to that concern. Or maybe you have a stairwell that patrons may they have access to. So you want to be able to, as a safety concern, to be able to see down that stairwell. But, let's face it, a lot of us have incurred theft of materials. So that's one of the nefarious things that happen within a library that the security surveillance cameras are used for. So when your libraries make the decision to use these cameras, please don't take it lightly and make sure that you educate your board, because remember, really most of the things that happen in our libraries are harmless. It's that, unfortunately, it's that 5% or 8% or 10% of the things that go on that make us think, oh my gosh, we have to have these cameras. When you do that, certainly do not take it lightly. And we want you just to always consider that when you make the decision.
So one thing that I want to point out to regarding this situation is you have to start somewhere, and you always hear us say that you need to start with a policy. It's always our first answer, because we either ask you, what does your policy say, or do you have one? And a part of your policy is a library patron code of conduct, or it might be a patron behavior statement, or it might be a customer service mission and standards. It's called a lot of things, but they all mean the same thing. And basically it says what your patrons are actually allowed to do or what they are not allowed to do. And so if you don't have that written down somewhere, then you have no legs to stand on. And regarding that use of the camera, they need to be informed that camera is there, and the camera is not used to change that behavior. And that's what we're guilty of thinking. Just because the camera is there, it's going to save us from theft. It's not necessarily. And it's going to keep us from some nefarious activity. It's not necessarily. We come reliant on that camera to do that job.
So we've got some examples for you if you don't have a patron behavior policy or code of conduct to show you, just to see the various things that you could probably adopt. Of course, with any policies, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we kind of went out and found a couple of our favorites. And these are included in the folder that we will provide a link to. So you don't have to go around looking for these. But here's one that we kind of liked. It's provided by the State Library of Iowa. And we kind of found this site. It's a really great site. And we're going to refer to it quite a bit during this presentation and probably through our whole journey, unless we find somebody else who's got better ideas. But here's a very clear, it's not long, it's tells you what is prohibited contact includes, and it's not limited to. It also talks about what can happen to you if you don't adhere to the rules. So in the state of Iowa, they may be removed from the library by the state patrol. Serious or repeated violation of the rules may result in patrons being banned from the library and or be permanently denied service. Bans may be appealed to the state librarian. So Patty, what do you like about this policy?
Well, that very last line, in whatever policy that you adopt, whatever you call it, your code of conduct, it has to have an appeals process, because whatever the person is asked to leave for or the behavior is asked to be modified for, they still have a right, because the public library is a public place and it belongs to the taxpayers, and they get to be there as long as they don't do the following, or they do the following, depending on the way you write your policy. But that last line is key. The other thing I like about this policy is everything is very clear. So when you are the one standing at that desk, whether it's in a one-person library and somebody takes their shoes off and that's a violation of your policy, you're able to take this piece of paper, check to make certain that it has been violated, and it's very clear. If somebody says, I want to see it, this I would be very comfortable handing to a patron saying, you violated numbers 3, 4, and 7.
Okay, so here's another one. Oops.
So pretty.
That's very pretty.
Everything turns pink.
Oh no, double pink. So here's one from a smaller library. We're not really sure where this is. I should have taken better care to find that out. But it looks like one that we think would appeal to most of the libraries in our system. So it defines what it is. It talks about the use of the space. It goes on to further even address meeting rooms in here, what people can and cannot do within the library in terms of publishing or distributing materials. Talks about children and other patrons of the library, animals, a lot of what was in the other policy, but it's spelled out a little bit more. I think one of the things about this that I got to get down here to show you the end of it. It's pretty long in its scope. It was just adopted by the Board of Trustees in 2017. So this is really important. It needs to be brought to your board as it is a policy and noted on here when your Board of Trustees adopted it. And a lot of the policies that we picked, some of them we were really happy with, but we weren't happy with the fact that they hadn't been addressed in a few years. So constantly, as times change, as libraries evolve, you really need to go back and revisit your policies. So make sure that that's something that you do. And I wouldn't suggest you tackle that all the policies at a time, maybe 1 or 2 at a meeting. That might be easier to manage. And we have one more example. Here's kind of a cool, we like this one.
Nice.
Yeah, we liked it a lot. We like this a lot. I'm gonna let you go ahead.
And this one, what's really nice is it states very specific what the purpose of the policy is, and then it has what you can do and what you can't do. And you'll notice I've used that term in a couple of different ways, because depending on how you write your policy, well, this one is very clear in that. And Margie had mentioned that the policy does need to be reviewed. Library best practices is that all of your policies are reviewed in no more than a 3-year cycle, but ideally in a 2-year cycle. So you can tackle the half that deal with the stuff and the half that deal with the people every other year, because there might be somebody on your board that's actually better tuned to the stuff or better tuned to the people. So that may be how you do that. And having a policy subcommittee of your board is a completely appropriate thing if that's how it works best, rather than having everybody sit in the room and then you just bring the final result of what the committee work was to the board for approval, which is certainly a good way to do it. But you as I said, you have limited leg to stand on if you don't have something to work with at the beginning. So I think you'll find things of each of these that you can use. And remember, it doesn't matter if you're Sylvan Grove or Salina. Everybody needs these policies to protect the library and the patron.
Yeah, and what I really liked about this is if you look at the top, the advisory board approved it, but then they took it to the city attorney. So I really like that. And so they do have some legal backing of what they've written. So that's a good one. Those are 3 really good ones for your use. All right, get back over here. Okay, so we've talked about that. So one of the things that I've noticed when I've walked into some libraries is, you know, they might have a really fancy security surveillance camera, but I never see a sign. And this is clearly a violation of patrons' privacy. You're in a public building and you must post signs at library entrances regarding use.
I do have a question about the patron policy. Do you have to have them posted in the library or a file on hand?
You're not required to have your policies posted. No. However, they should be at the ready if you need them.
Right.
And there may, if you use the policy and do post it, you want to post it in its entirety, because if there is an argument over something in that policy, you need to make sure that you have all the pieces around it. So you want to post it in its entirety, but having it at your service desk, whatever that looks like, should be able to be touched by any hands who work in the library. That's your volunteers, that's your library director or librarian, and any staff that you have. They need to know where those policies are.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I was going to put one, if I was going to post one, it would be the behavior policy and code of conduct, because that directly impacts everybody that uses the library. All right, so we talked about posting signs, and these can be as simple as we're using a surveillance device. I mean, there are a lot of ways to word this. The point is you have to inform the public that you're recording the goings on within and without, inside and outside of the library. Okay, again, we're going to show you some policies for surveillance cameras, but one of the things that's really important is the video monitor should be out of sight. When we talk about patron privacy, and we talked about the few people that are probably that are in the library that are doing anything nefarious, we have to consider those other 90%. So it's not fair that if I walk in the library and I can see my friend Jane way back in the nonfiction section doing some research, and I go, oh, there's Jane, and walk back there and say, hey, Jane, I saw you on the camera. And she might be researching, I don't know, something that's highly personal. So, you know, we have to be very considerate about what patrons are seeing, what the patrons were filming, but also what the patrons that are seeing that walk into the building. It's just amazing to me. This has happened. I've seen it, and then Patty actually had this happen when she was at a library recently, that she was invited behind the desk and could see everything that was going on in the library. You have to have a policy on use of the camera. You just absolutely must. And within this policy, the use of the camera and the footage use has to include, like I mentioned, protocols for sign placement or giving notice about the presence of the cameras, how you store the videotapes and other digital images, and what secure location that you use, how you destroy the images on the tapes, you know, and how long that you keep them. One of the things that's in this wording here is that the images need to be stored for the briefest amount of time possible, or as soon as permitted by law. So if you state statute, you may have to refer to that, but I don't think in Kansas we have any rules about how long you need to keep the footage. Basically what it means is if you're reviewing your footage and everything looks fine, it can be deleted. The library also has to recognize its possibility to protect patron confidentiality like what we have in the patron record. So for instance, if your camera is really high def, it could certainly be looking over my shoulder, and if I'm a patron and viewing what I'm looking at on the internet. You know, it could have my email address. It could have a lot of things that are personal. So we have to be really mindful that while our motive might be pure, you are really recording a lot of very personal and confidential data, and you have to act responsibly.
I'm going to give you an example of that. If I'm standing in the stacks and there is a high quality video camera above my head, and say I'm in the 600s and I am researching what does it look if I have HIV, And if that camera is positioned in the right way and can see it, the person, if they can see a video monitor, whether it's a staff member or Margie, who happens to be in the same library that I'm in and sees that, immediately she can worry about me, wonder if I'm working on a paper, wonder if I'm ill, or the worst situation is she can walk out of the library and tell somebody else what I was looking at, and which could create a bigger snowball of problems. And so it seems really dumb to say, but it is very true. Margie mentioned that I had this experience and I was invited behind a desk. It wasn't in one of the CK libraries. It was in another library because that's what librarians do. They go on vacation to libraries. And I was invited behind the desk because I had a name tag that said I was a librarian. And the screen was right there and it had 6 cameras that I could see. And I could see their whole library. And I'm sitting here going, okay, first you brought a stranger behind it. Now I can see everything that's going on. But the only reason I was invited behind the desk because I asked about it, because I could see it, because I was standing at their public photocopier and I could see the 6 screens. So I said, can I see what's on that screen? And they're like, sure, come on back.
Yeah. And you know, we just have to be very sensitive about that. So
here's another question. Do you have to have anything in the surveillance camera policy regarding handing over video to authorities?
Well, yes, you do. We're gonna show you some examples, and since you asked the question, so if a library's experienced theft or vandalism or any suspected criminal activity, you are certainly within your right to voluntarily supply the images to law enforcement. What the way to actually do that would be if your staff, you would tell your director, who would then turn those over to the library's legal counsel, who can then turn them over to law enforcement. So it's better not for you just to go straight to law enforcement. You probably need to have some sort of protocol or procedure that's followed about handing those documents over. You know, because you have to remember, it's you may suspect something is going on, but they also may have a pile of books or movies, and that video footage is going to have the names of all those things, and that's just like a patron circulation history. So you have to be a little careful about how you do that, but it's certainly it's within your rights to go ahead and do that. So we'll jump right to the.
While she's pulling that up, I'm going to reiterate something that she said. She said that there has to be a process for saving this information in a secure location. So that means that computer screen isn't just open for anybody to get into. And for the length of saving that footage, basically it's not you turn it on and you just let it save forever. It's not your insurance policy forever. And I'm afraid that sometimes we think of it in that way.
Right. Okay, so here's an example of a pretty sparse security camera policy. I'm not real crazy about it. It doesn't really tell you anything about what's going to happen with that footage. It doesn't talk about monitoring the footage, which is another thing that I wonder if we really understand the ramifications of this. Because I've walked into places, I walked into schools, especially, I'll use Great Bend High School as an example. Their front door is very much removed from their office. Mm-hmm. And they've got the camera, but nobody's really sitting there watching it. It's just going on. So it's almost like, well, it's there to capture something that already has happened versus something that's in the act of happening. So I'm a little, yeah.
And this one just says, in preventing the occurrence of any violations.
Right, it's pretty vague.
Okay.
So I don't know. We weren't too
It's been recently approved and reviewed, but that's what it's got going for it.
Now this one says they're not constantly monitored and they should take appropriate precautions to safeguard their safety and personal property. So anyway, it wasn't one of my favorites, so we wanted to point that out. All right, so.
But it does refer directly to the code of conduct.
Right. Now here's one both of us really liked. It was like, oh wow, this is really great. It's got its purpose. It's like why we're doing this in the first place. Talks about the locations of the cameras because, of course, everybody knows you can't put them. Your staff has the right not to be videotaped in private areas. You can't use this in the bathrooms, etc. The director has to make the decision of whether or not these cameras can be changed, etc. So most of this goes on to your director. The access to the digital images, use and disclosure of the records, what to do when law enforcement is requesting access. It's clearly defined here, and I think this helps staff especially because the director's not always there. So it's nice to always have a clear protocol for your staff. What the general public requesting access to the security camera footage. Somebody may say my bike was stolen, I want access to it. That's something that could occur. Retention of digital images. Now, they haven't revisited this in 5 years, and so that's a little concerning, but overall, I think it's a really good policy. We got one more, and this one was for Omaha. So, a big branch system, of course, but I like this one in its scope. It talks about why they have the cameras, so to provide peace of mind to library users and staff, to discourage violations of the library's rules of conduct. So going back to what we talked about earlier, talks about their signage, etc. Really good policy. And gonna scroll down here. I love this. It was approved, reapproved, and updated and reapproved. So,
and you see where that is located. It's
right.
Located on their website.
On the website.
It's not hidden in a book somewhere.
No.
So someone has that understanding when they walk into the Omaha Public Library, any of their branches, that they are being videotaped, and all their questions are right there. So before we leave this part, there's something that I want to say. One of the hardest things is I mentioned that for some it's an insurance policy, but what happens when you rely on it to answer the question or solve the problem, and you walk back to that room and discover it's not been videoing? You don't have any tape, whatever that tape is digitally now. You don't have any tape to look at. It's might still be actually serving as a monitor only, but it's not been saving any of that. We become too reliant on it's going to do the job for us. Your keen eyes and your awareness as library staff are the best thing that you have in your building. They're the ones that are going to help you solve your problem.
Which this brings me to another interesting concept. So how many of you have thought about putting up fake cameras? They're cheaper, or you don't have to deal with any of it.
We had one where I worked before.
Yeah, so in fact, I think, in a building, in a library not too far from me, I think they might have had some fake ones. So the questions posed, is there a problem with that? Or with posting a sign that says this facility uses video surveillance? Well, there is a problem, because the problem is that as a public institution, the general public trusts us. And if you say something that is not true, and it's the public trust, and you could set yourself up for more liability than you're willing to have. Because if I walk in and think that everything's really rosy and I have this false sense of security, and then all of a sudden something happens and I realize, well, no, that's not the case, then you could set yourself up for a lot of more legal challenges than I think that you're probably willing to or can afford. So before you make decisions like that, you really have to think about the ramifications of that. So I'm not going to go too far into that, but it is something that, you just can't do. And you don't want to make your city vulnerable. And your insurance company may insist that you have real surveillance cameras and not fake ones. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that.
Some libraries put them over their book drop, the fake ones over their book drop, thinking that's going to save you from having things dumped in your book drop that you don't want.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on. All right. So the next thing we want to talk about are the use of photographs and consent. So it's getting to be summer library program. We love it. We love seeing all your posts on Facebook and seeing all those really great storytime photos. And we really like it. It's fun. But we got to thinking, again, got to refer back to the state of Iowa. They had a very interesting question posed, and it was all about this use of photographs and consent. And is it enough just to put a sign up in the library that says, hey, we're going to go ahead and take a picture of your kids, or we're going to be filming, or not directly your children, but we'll be filming everything in the library for possible use for marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you think about that? What do you think about that, Miss Patty?
Well, personally, I love to see all of these pictures, and I think that's great. However, many times I have been approached by a parent saying, our situation at home is very different than maybe somebody else's. I understand that you made the announcement that you're going to take pictures. However, my child can't be photographed. And if they are, that picture can't be put on social media. It can't be given to the newspaper. Now, as the librarian, you all know that it's hard when you've got that group of kids and you want to just snap the picture of the room. So what's my opportunity? I move to the back of the room and I take the picture of the full group and the presenter is in the front. Because you have to remember, everybody that's in that room might not know your situation. And their situation might be such as their person, it doesn't matter if it's a little person or a big person, that person needs to be protected from some other person or for some other situation, and we need to make sure that we respect that privacy. So they're allowed to be a part of the library and not missing out on anything.
Yeah, so this is kind of I don't know if there's a right and wrong response with this one. So one of the things that I read was, so a library posted a sign that basically said all library programs are open to the public. Please note that photos may be taken, published by various media outlets to promote library services. And this is the crux. By attending library programs, you're giving your permission to be photographed and to have that photograph published. So what law says is that this particular wording is exclusionary. And so what that means is that if I'm a mom and I walk in and I say, I don't really want my kid's picture to be used, they've already excluded me or my child from this programming because they basically said, this is what's going to happen. And a really savvy parent could turn around and say, you're denying my kid's services. So whether or not you decide to post this, we do have some wording that you could use. Don't write it in such a way that it excludes people. Everything that we do in the library should be inclusively written. There are some legal considerations to this. When I was doing a little research, there's no legal expectation of privacy in the United States when it comes to this kind of thing. And you just have to use prudence, especially when you're thinking about photographs of children. If people take a picture of a birthday party and they put it on Facebook, do you think someone's going to sue them? I don't think so. But if I'm a newspaper and I take a picture of a child and I put it in the paper without getting permission, and their father's recently released from prison, comes in and does harm, that is not prudent. And that it's not that that's just ridiculous. So in different layers of society, we have to use our heads and we have to think about what's the best course of action. Public agencies like the library, we're held to a higher standard of accountability. So you have to be really careful with wording those notices. So let's look at a couple of policies, which are, everybody should have these because it certainly does protect you. And I know during the eclipse, Patty and I did a little looking on this. The state of Kansas has absolutely nothing in statute about photographing. So we were pretty sure, we kind of deferred to what most of the people in the library world do. And you'll see with this one, this is a really great patron photograph policy. It talks about the intent. It talks about attendance and events sponsored by the library. They're going to post prominently throughout the library, everywhere, how they're going to use and obtain these photographs. They do a really great thing. They make an announcement about photos being taken and notifying the staff if you don't want to be photographed. I think that's great, etc. Talks about photos taken by the media. I don't know how many of you have the newspaper come in, but they have some rules and regulations here for them. No permission of, and this is probably pretty global. You don't have to have permission taking a picture of a crowd. Talks about adults, children under 18. There's a photo release form right here. And I know, like Patty talked about, it is kind of hard when you're the only one there and you're trying to do a program and you want to take some pictures and you don't want to take the time to do this. I was out in a school when I was taking around the 3D printers. We just tried to take pictures from the kids from behind because I didn't really have time to fill out a release form, etc. So great, really great policy for photographs.
And again, this is really nice because it's right there on their website.
Yep.
And I know some of you aren't there yet, but this is some things that you can aspire to do, is to get your policies out there, because it's a great way to inform your patrons of the kind of library that they're walking into.
Right. All right, and we've got one other one. This is really simple.
Oh, yes, this is good.
If you're looking for wording, this is Chicago Public Library. Pretty simple.
Huge library, one paragraph.
Right.
Reserves the right to utilize photographs or video taken at the library for publicity in print materials and online. Says right there. All library patrons consent to use the use of their photo taken at the library or during library events unless they specifically inform staff of an objection to such use. No names will be utilized in conjunction with photos without express written consent.
So we've seen two extremes. We have really simple. We have not. So again, there's a link on in our folder about legal considerations, and it's that site from the State Library of Iowa. It poses questions, and it's really good food for thought. And we got a lot of our content from them. So
I do have a question from the crowd. For small communities where everybody knows everybody and they prefer verbal consent and don't want to fill out paperwork, is verbal confirmation okay?
I don't think so. I mean, I personally, it would not hold up in a court of law. So if you get verbal consent and you don't know that particular person in the community may have a relative that has an axe to grind and sees that picture and comes back, yeah, I would not do that. I mean, I think you're better off either getting it signed or, I suppose you could use something like this, because they're not, what you have to do is give them the option of opting out. That's the important part about all policy. It's not that we're going to do it, but you can see that it says inform staff of an objection to such use. That's where you put it on them. So
then do you want them to fill out a form to opt out then? So that's documented?
I don't think so. I mean, because you've stated it here, it's clear. But if you don't have anything and everybody just, it's like, hi, we're going to take pictures, okay, great. That's not good enough.
And
so
this is concise enough that it could be the paragraph that's put right below your security camera, or it's the thing. I mean, when you have a grant program, sometimes they require you to read the thing before you start, and maybe this is the thing that you just start a program with. It's that reminder. But basically, you're giving your patrons an option, and it is a safety net for you. We would never want to hear from one of your libraries that there was a situation that put your library in a legal battle or in a situation that made you even uncomfortable. And so we're trying to help inform you of the best ways. And we do hear a lot, everybody knows everybody in town. But I think Margie did a great job of saying it's not the people that are necessarily in the picture. It's the non-custodial parent who sees the picture and now knows where that child is.
Yeah.
If the library doesn't have a web page but a Facebook page, do those policies have to be posted there?
I don't think you have to put them on your Facebook page. The better place is the location that the photograph is being taken. So, for instance, I know during the eclipse, one of the libraries wanted to take pictures. She posted it exactly with the wording of opting out at the site, so people could see it. And of course, you could always say you'll find the person that says, "I didn't see the sign. I didn't see the sign." So it's the choice is yours. You either word it like the Chicago Public Library did, where it puts the responsibility to the patron to opt out, or you have people sign a release statement. I would always do that. I would always get a release signed if you're going to give those pictures to the newspaper and you're using names, especially for children. You really should do that. I mean, not only for your safety, but for theirs as well. I mean, you want them to know, it's informed consent. I mean, people have to know that. So,
and then the follow-up question is, a copy of the policy would have to be posted or brought to an off-site library event? Question mark?
Not the policy per se, but the wording about photographing. Yes, if you need to post it. You need to have it. People need to see it. So the example was during the eclipse, and they were at a football field, and she had, that it was a pretty big event. So they posted it so people knew.
Okay.
And I see that Belleville says that we have our photo policy included on our slideshow for the TV. So it's there, and it's that reminder as that slideshow of events goes through. So it's one of those things we know that we as library users, whether it's our patrons or us, we know we don't always read the signs, but but we do make every attempt to share that information that our patrons need to continue that trust that they have with us.
Okay, so we want to get to the labeling and movie, but I have one more thing I want to talk to you about. So when we're talking about privacy concerns and confidentiality, we want to also revisit saving patron circ history. Right now, Pathfinder, and I'm not sure about those of you who use your own ILSs, Belleville being one and Beloit being another, our system set up right now that you have to opt out to have your history saved. Coming soon, I believe June 1st, Gail has directed me that it's going to start an opt-in to save, meaning I come in and get a library card. My circ history will not be saved unless I so choose it to be saved. I believe I could probably safely assume that most of you, when you sign up a patron, don't say, oh, by the way, do you know we're saving your circulation history? Maybe you do. I could be wrong, and I hope I am. But this should be a patron-driven decision. Most of the decisions about the ILS and the saving of their data should be driven by them. So that change to Pathfinder will be coming soon. It's not going to change the patrons that were signed up before June 1st, so it will not be retroactive, but it will be going forward. I don't know if many of you remember in 2015 we had a series of unfortunate events where somebody accidentally deleted all of the patrons in Pathfinder, and Mary Beth restored them all with the help of Bywater. But
that was not a fun day.
Circ history was lost, which probably wasn't a bad thing. So you need to make sure your patrons know this, and a simple like a paper or a cardstock. This is what's coming up the pipe, and let them make the decision.
So there is a question on that. Will we be able to delete the history of all our patrons from our end? There's a thing that each patron can do to turn off their circulation history. If you want to turn off the circulation history for your patrons, we can look into that and see if we can do that on a library by library basis to do it retroactively. But each patron has the possibility to turn off their circ history.
Yeah, and it does, I believe you can have the choice to have it anonymized, your circ history, as a patron. But what it does, when you anonymize it, you still get credit for the check-ins and checkouts. So it doesn't affect circulation history on the library end, but we don't record a record.
But it's not attributed to a specific
you
patron.
wouldn't know that it's my cat Willie checking out the movie on fishing or something like that.
So I just have one question. Sure. See if you can clarify this for me. So I've been a patron through Great Bend Public Library since 2012. So when you do this, from 2015 when we had that situation, will all that stuff be saved? Will it continue to save on June 1st, my patron history, or will it just stop on June 1st? It
will stop on June 1st unless you opt in to go in and save your history. So it's driven by you. So my 2015 to 2019 is there. But going forward, you have to decide to save it. I have to make that choice. Yeah. And is that, as a patron, is that a button that I have to push, or can my librarian push it for me? No, you'll have to. You will have to go in. It will be already set up that it will not be saved. So if you want to save it, you need to go in and save it. Okay. So how do I do that? My mom is not. My mom is not techie, and my mom is going to say, I don't ever use the online version of
of my ILS. So do I have to find someone to go and help her do that, or can my librarian help me do that?
I've never really done that. I have to look. I think it has to be patron driven, right, Mary Beth?
That's the way I understand it. Yes, it has to be patron driven. There's not a side on this but as a librarian, one of the things that we can always teach is how a patron can get onto their personal account. There are a lot of people that are senior citizens that get online to do banking. This is a lot easier than banking. So I think it's a very teachable thing to do, and I don't think it's expecting too much to teach somebody how to be in control of their library account.
And I know Bywater has some great tutorials. I've thought about reinventing the wheel, but I don't, the only difference is that our landing page looks a little bit different than theirs, but I could certainly do that. It's easy enough to do. So, and it talks you right through it. So I think your mom would be okay.
And now I want to address this from, you all know that I was a librarian before I was here. And when I was a librarian, this landed on my desk. We made this decision. I know that this is one of those things that scares the heck out of you because you've always done it and you need it, and at least you think you do. And it scared me as well. I was the head of circulation, and I was the one who had to be the first person to inform our library or our patrons that this was, we were changing how this worked. And basically they had a little 3x5 card that at that point we took the opportunity to have them put all of their personal patron information, get it updated, because we know that we don't have the current cell phone number for half the people in our database. So we did that. And then this was the opportunity for them to opt in to save their history, and then they signed their card. There were 2 boxes, opt in or opt out. And there was an explanation of what that meant. And each of our staff, whether it's 1 person or 20, each staff member knew exactly how to explain what was happening. We did it on our end because we did it as we moved to a new integrated library system, a new online circulation system. But we thought we were expecting the world to end, very honestly, because we thought we were doing something so different. We maybe had 3 complaints out of 16,000 people. So don't worry about your towns. They're going to be okay.
Yeah, I think it boils down to right now they don't know we're saving it. So anyway. Okay, so we want to get to the next part because I'm sure a lot of you that's why you came. All right, so the use of rating systems and labeling. This topic came about to us because, as you all know, CKLS provides a movie license or movie viewing license for all of the libraries across the system. And as we got to thinking about that, I started looking at some things. I saw some really unusual item types. So for instance, a DVD with an R or a Blu-ray with an R, or things that label our content. And really decided it was time to kind of peel back the onion on this because I know people are confused about it. They don't understand the whole point of it. They don't understand what they can use it for. So here we go.
So we've talked a little bit about the Motion Picture Association of America is the be-all, end-all of the film ratings, and you know them as GPG, RX, and NC-17. And basically, they were created once motion pictures became a thing. They were created to be the moral gatekeepers. That's a good word. Basically, somebody watching out for what was actually going into these films. And so they developed something called the Production Code of Moral Censorship Guidelines. Well, that's a whole bunch of fancy words, but I think Margie hit it right on it and said it's the gatekeeper. In 1952, the Supreme Court did rule that motion pictures are an expression of that is covered by the First Amendment. And so now they're sitting there with this, what they called the Hays Code, which was this original system. And they discovered that the things that it was looking at were not really the things of the people of the 1950s and certainly not the 1960s. in 1968, and we've shown you how so many things with the American Library Association, decisions that they made, were exactly connected to things that happened in the rest of the world. So 1968, if you are old enough to remember, or if you're like me, a brand new baby, you knew that we were dealing with a time of unrest in our country, and this was at the time we were in Vietnam, and you know that we had people on lots of different sides of the fence and a lot of different things happening. Well, they changed the rating system to the one that you know today. And when I was out researching more about the Motion Picture Association of America, their tagline says, "Informing Parents Since 1968." So basically what it is there's a classification system that's a whole bunch of parents. They're independent group of parents who are looking at all of these films and determining where they fit on the scale. And they have some guidelines that they use to do that. And they have an active Twitter feed, so you can actually see new movies that they're looking at and where they're landing. You'll find all of that stuff on filmratings.com, and it has the history of the ratings. But the key to this whole thing is this is voluntary.
Yeah, it's an independent group of people, and a division of MPAA. So MPAA is made up of all the studios that you know of. I mean, and as a group, they have all decided, the membership has decided, we will not show movies that are not rated. Now, that goes on to the next level. So the Classification and Ratings Administration, or CARA, is a division of MPAA. So we got to looking at that, and I knew in my history of researching this and all of my work, I wanted to know who can use this and who owns the content. Well, I finally found it, and if you go onto MPAA and you look up all the information about user or using the content, they're very clear. So we have, like, as Patty said, this was created by an independent group of parents. And basically what it is, it's a guideline. It is not legally binding. However, the use of the content is. So for instance, if you use if you can subscribe to all of their rules and regulations about content, but without prior consent, you can't do any altering or changing or misrepresenting their particular information. So we have two levels here. We have trademark infringement, because we all know what their rating system looked like. It's the G. You'll see that motion,
square.
The square, the R. We all know what it looks like. So to use that without prior consent is a trademark infringement. This goes on to say copyright infringement would be if you take their well-known labeling system and adapt it for your own use. Now, if you do read all the rules and regulations and subscribe to everything that they say, you're more than welcome to use it and to hand this out to your patrons as an information-only sheet. But it doesn't give you the right to take an R, because we all know what that means, and slap it on the spine of a video or a game or music or what have you. And we'll go into that a little bit more in depth. But so do remember, this content is, the use of it's expressly prohibited unless you get writing from, unless you get consent from the motion picture industry group to use it for your application. So that means labeling all of the things in your library. And this goes on with a lot of things, books, et cetera, et cetera. What else? Books, CDs, audios, et cetera. But so I want you to just remember that a lot of organizations use or devise rating systems as a mean for advertisement. And it represents an organization's opinion. So that's where this is the real slippery slope for a librarian, because we're all about the First Amendment. We're all about the Fourth Amendment. And yeah, so we've got a lot of things going on here with this. It's just kind of, I can get really wound up about this.
In terms of, we're talking specifically right now about the Motion Picture Association of America and their film ratings. But, there's been lots and lots of battles. If you've paid attention to the news 30 years ago, and so it's surprising that it's been this long, but there was what they called the obscenity wars over the lyrics on kids on CDs that they deemed inappropriate for children. If you'll watch a television program, there's another independent group that actually puts the little Y7 that you'll see at the bottom of a cartoon. I believe it's the Simpsons that they were the first to do the Y7, which means youth over 7 is what they recommend. But it's video games, it's television, it's music that all have their independent rating systems. Again, they're all voluntary, and they do serve a purpose. The idea to have these rating systems is for MPAA, theirs was to help families determine what was deemed appropriate for their families to read or to watch. But in terms of the other thing that it did was, if people aren't going to the movies, the studios aren't making any money. MPAA is separate from the studios, but it does serve a purpose. And your local theater is not bound to use the rating systems, but they use the rating systems because they know that's what you expect as a user of a movie theater, as a moviegoer.
So when we talk about legality, I just want to point out to you that the courts have stepped in and invalidated a lot of laws and ordinances put in places by many cities across the country, because what it does is it's a means to deny access. And a minor has just as much access to information as anybody else. And it's a First Amendment right violation. All right, so I've got people ask me about theaters and how do they get away with it? Well, a theater is what? It's a business. And their compliance is totally voluntary. And they don't have any legal duty to enforce the recommendations, but because the motion picture industry members all agree to ratings, to show having movies rated, they go ahead and subscribe with it. But there's also no legal ramification if somebody that's under 17 buys a ticket to an R-rated movie, because it's completely voluntary. Businesses can only enforce that restriction of access based on age. That's the one area that they can fall under the business rules. So that's how they get away with it. And I don't know, Patty and I were talking a lot about the fact that you can buy tickets online. And I know the kids that work at the theater here in town, they're under 16. So they're probably selling tickets for R-rated movies, et cetera. So it's kind of it's up to the parents. This is when it falls to the parents and the access that kids can have to seeing content.
So there is a question. Does this mean that when we are advertising for a movie, we cannot tell what the MPAA rating is?
I think you can tell what the rating is, because I don't think you're endorsing or you're
just providing information.
Because there's another flip side to this. We talk about you can't label, you can't also unlabel. So I found some information that says if I get a book or a movie or an audio that comes labeled with a particular label on it, then I can't unlabel it. So it's against the law for me to deconstruct it as well. So you have to take the content as it is presented. So I can look into that a little bit more, but I would say pretty much, I don't know if I would advertise it. I don't know if I would advertise it. I would probably think
I think this is another one of those slippery slopes, and we do not have all the answers, because if we did, we would be taking this on the road somewhere.
I do think there's. We want to go on because I know we're kind of getting out of time here, but so the ALA has positions on. They have a position on everything, and here's kind of the rating system and labeling position. So. We get a little twisted up about things in our library. We got to protect the public, etc. But just because it's in your library doesn't mean that you endorse it. There's a lot of things in the libraries that I don't read, and I don't agree with, and I don't necessarily think somebody should be looking at them or reading them. But it's not my call, and it doesn't mean I endorse it. Our job is to provide access. So it also, if you use or adopt a rating system that's generated, because those rating systems got to back up their opinion, they're the views of an independent agency. then you are violating our Library Bill of Rights, and it may be unconstitutional. So you have to kind of defer to your state law. And you have to remember those labels are designed to restrict because they're based on a value judgment. So just be careful.
And we found a statement that says, no one person should take responsibility for judging what is offensive. Such voluntary labeling in bibliographic records and catalogs violates the Library Bill of Rights.
Right. And then taking this a little bit further, this is a really great statement that came out of the Office for Intellectual Freedom. And basically, what it boils down to is when you label, you are doing content-based restrictions. And that's against, that's a violation of free speech. And it will not hold up in a court of law. You want to have neutral content. That's the whole basis of this. And we have a lot of things in our folder that address this. There's a really great website that Patty and I both happen to find. It's an encyclopedia of the First Amendment, and it's a great place. And that's where I first went. Well, actually, have a son who just got out of law school, so I tapped into him about this because he talked to me about trademark infringement and content-based restrictions and on freedom of speech. And I think we kind of are. I think these are words that a lot of us haven't ever heard. So with the climate in America and the things going on, we kind of need to be better at our game here. And this is a really great statement because we are a government entity, and we don't have the power to restrict expression because of the message. And we're at our hour, so I'm going to make sure we have time for a few questions. But do think about that. And while I know your motives are pure, children that come into your library or people that come into your library have other people that can worry about them. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So.
And then I'll leave with this part is that, when we talked about providing that access, one of the hardest decisions that we have to make is to purchase an item or put it on our shelves with something that we are morally or personally opposed to, whether it's religion or politics or sexual orientation or race or whatever it is, because we all have to make decisions as librarians. And I said that at the very beginning, that we are uncomfortable with. And just that reminder that the person that's walking in your door may not agree with you politically. And so the right thing is you have both sides of the story. And that's both sides of the story on any issue. I know you don't have enough money to buy every single book that does that, but it is important that you realize that the person that walks in your door might not agree with you and might have other needs that are different from your own.
So we'd like to spend more time talking today, but we know you're busy. So do you have any questions?
Feel free to unmute your mic if you need to. I don't see any coming through on the chat box, but we'll give it a little bit more time for people to type one in if they need to. I will say that yes, I am recording this one. It will be archived, and I will put it up on the YouTube channel and send out an email probably by the end of today, if not by the end of this week.
Yeah, and look for us in the fall. We're going to take this show on the road. We're going to go out into the system and present a workshop. We haven't quite structured it, but we know there's a lot of questions, and people have questions that they bring to the table about, what do I do about this? Or how do I do this? How do I do this? Or what do I do? And, while we don't know all the answers, we can sure look around. And the deeper we get into this, I hope we are doing our best to find the answers. And of course, it always goes back to, this is your library. We're not going to come in and, we're not the library police, but we're the library. I don't know. We can recommend what you should do. So anyway.
We will provide library best practices and help you make the best decisions that we can.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, plug for the Intellectual Freedom LibGuide. Its link can be found on the landing page of our website, and I updated it last week. We have some intellectual freedom issues coming up in the library world. We had the banned books list come out, and Banned Books Week is in September. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any new questions in the chat box, so I think we're good done.
Thank you for your time today.
Bye.
Be awesome. Do great things.